Hey everyone, today you are going to continue with finding the measures of angles algebraically. So you will be creating multi-step equations in order to do so. So the assignment today looks very similar to what you did yesterday. You were going to follow the same steps and type in all of your work and your answers in the text boxes. The only difference is the angle measures that we're going to be finding. So remember, step one is to identify the type of angles that you have. So here we have an angle that's labeled 3x minus 2 and an angle that's labeled 4x minus 10. So you need to recognize or identify the angle relationship that we have here. Both of these angles are corresponding angles. So I'm going to type in corresponding angles. Now, you need to not only identify the angle relationship, but you also need to know the important definition of what corresponding angles are in order to create your equation to solve for the missing angle. So just like yesterday, I have those definitions listed here. Please just highlight the corresponding fact about the angle relationship that's going to help you build your equation. So what we need to know about corresponding angles is that they are congruent, which means they are equal to each other. So this angle 3x minus 2 and this angle 4x minus 10 are equal to each other. So I'm going to set them equal to each other in an algebraic equation, which means I'm going to have one angle on one side of the equal sign and the other angle on the other side of the equal sign. Now I have to simply solve this equation. In this equation, we have variables on both sides of the equal sign. So our first step is to get all the variables to one side of the equal sign. So I'm going to move this 3x over to this side. So I'm going to subtract 3x on both sides of the equal sign. The reason I am subtracting is because right now this 3x is positive. So I need to get rid of a positive 3x. And how I do that is simply by subtracting 3x. So I subtract 3x on both sides. Remember, when I do that, line up your 3x with its like term, because you cannot subtract the negative 10 and the negative 3x because they are not like terms. So when I line those up, I simply need to subtract. 3x minus 3x is simply 0. They cancel each other out. So I bring down the 2, but also be careful. You're also bringing down that minus sign because that 2 is negative. So you bring down a negative 2. Bring down the equal sign. 4x minus 3x is 1x, or you can simply just write x and then bring down the minus 10. Now you have a simple two-step equation that you have to solve. So our next step is to simply add 10 to both sides. Again, the reason I'm adding 10 to both sides is because in my original equation, I am minusing 10. I have to use my inverse operations, and the inverse operation of subtraction is addition. So I add 10 to both sides. Okay, when I do that, negative 2 plus 10 is 8. Bring down the 1x, or simply bring down the x if that's what you wrote, and the 10s are going to cancel each other out. Last and final step, if you have that 1 in front of your variable, simply divide both sides by 1, and 8 divided by 1 is 8, which equals x. So x is equal to 8. Okay, our third step is to substitute the value of x into the given angles to calculate their numerical value. Okay, so if we come over here, our first angle measure is 3x minus 2. So instead of writing that x, I'm going to plug in what my x is equal to, which is 8. Okay, so 3 in parentheses 8 minus 2. I have to evaluate this, and how I have to do that is multiply before we subtract. So I have to multiply 3 times 8, which is 24, and then 24 minus 2 is 22. So this angle measure is 22 degrees. Now, since we know that these are corresponding angles, we should already know what this angle is going to be, but again, we still want to show all of our work to make sure we get it right, because if we get a different angle measure, we'll know we made a silly mistake. So my angle is 4x minus 10. So instead of writing the x, I'm going to type in what x is equal to, which is 8. So 4 times 8 minus 10. 4 times 8 is 32. 32 minus 10 is 22. So the measure of that angle is 22 degrees, as it should be, because they're corresponding angles, and we know corresponding angles are equal to each other. Okay, next one, identify the type of angles we have here. Well, I have two angles that are on a straight line, making these supplementary angles. The important fact that we need to know about supplementary angles is simply that they add up to be 180 degrees. So I'm going to add these two angles together and set them equal to 180 like I did. For this equation that we just created, we have like terms. So our first step is to combine our like terms. I color-coded the like terms for you. Please remember to look at the sign in front of each term because that's what's going to tell you if those terms are positive or negative when you go to combine them. So I'm first combining 9x plus 11x, which gives me 20x, and then positive 38 plus 62, which is 100, and then bring down the equals 180. Now we have a simple two-step equation that we can solve. So now we are going to subtract 100 on both sides. Again, the reason I'm subtracting is because I need to get rid of this plus 100, and the inverse operation of addition is subtraction. So I simply subtract 100 on both sides. I bring down the 20x. The 100s cancel each other out. Bring down the equal sign. 180 minus 100 is 80. My last and final step is to divide both sides by my coefficient, or the number in front of the variable, which in this case is 20. So I divide both sides by 20. 20x divided by 20 is simply x, and 80 divided by 20 is 4. So we get x is equal to 4. Okay, final step is to substitute that value of x into the given angles to calculate their numerical value. So again, my first angle is 9x plus 38. So instead of writing x, I'm going to type in what x is now equal to, which is 4. To evaluate this, I have to multiply before I add. 9 times 4 is 36. 36 plus 38 is 74. So the measure of that first angle is 74 degrees. Next angle, which is angle VTS, which is equal to 11x plus 62. Again, instead of writing that x, I'm going to plug in 4 because that's what x is equal to. I have to multiply first before I add. 11 times 4 is 44. 44 plus 62 is 106. So the measure of that missing angle is 106 degrees. And again, you can check to make sure that you are correct with these angles as well by simply adding them together. And when you add them together, they should equal 180 degrees because they are supplementary. And in this case, 106 plus 74 does in fact equal 108 degrees, so we know we are correct. Okay, number 3, step 1, identify the type of angles. Well, I have two angles that are formed by the intersection of two lines, and these angles are across from each other, making them vertical angles. What we need to know about vertical angles is that all vertical angles are congruent, which means they are equal to each other. Okay, so 9x plus 72 has to be equal to 4x plus 112, so I'm going to set those angles equal to each other just like we did in the first one. This is what our equation should look like. Again, now we have an equation that has variables on both sides. So my first step is to get all the variables on one side by using our inverse operations. I always like to start with the smaller amount of variables. So I'm going to move the 4x over to this side of the equation. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to subtract 4x on both sides because the 4x right now is positive. And how I get rid of a positive is simply by subtracting. So I subtract 4x on both sides. Again, be sure to line your 4x up with its like term, which is 9x. And then I just got to simplify this. 9x minus 4x is 5x. Bring down the plus sign, bring down the 72, bring down the equal sign. 4x minus 4x cancels each other out, and I bring down a positive 112. Now I have a basic two-step equation that I have to solve. So now I'm going to subtract 72 on both sides. I'm going to then bring down the 5x. The 72's cancel. 112 minus 72 is 40. Last and final step is to divide both sides by 5. So 5x divided by 5 is simply x, and 40 divided by 5 is 8. So we get x is equal to 8. Step 3 is to substitute that numerical value of x into the given angles. So I first am asking to find the angle measure 9x plus 72. So just as always, I'm going to plug in 8 where I see x, and then I'm going to evaluate. 9 times 8 is 72. 72 plus 72 is 144. So I know that that first angle measure up here, angle AEB, is equal to 144 degrees. Now be careful with the second angle measure. I'm asking you for the measure of angle AEC. This 4x plus 12 is not angle AEC. Angle AEC is right here, angle AEC. I didn't give you a numerical value or a numerical expression or an algebraic expression for this angle, but I can still figure out what this angle measure is equal to because This angle, 9x plus 72, and this angle are supplementary because they're on this straight line, BC. I know together they have to equal 180 degrees. Well, I already know that this angle equals 144 because that's what we just found over here. So I can simply find the measure of angle AEC by subtracting 180 minus 44. And 180 minus 44 is 36 degrees. So the measure of angle AEC is 36 degrees. Okay. For this assignment, guys, just be careful when you're reading what angles I'm asking you to find the measure of. It's a little bit different than yesterday. Okay, we'll do another one. Identify the type of angles we have here. Well, I have two angles that are inside the set of parallel lines and they're on opposite sides of the transversal, making them alternate interior angles. We need to know that alternate interior angles are congruent, which means they are equal to each other. So I'm going to set these two angles equal to each other like this, and then I'm going to solve this equation just like we've been doing. I'm first going to move all my variables to one side by subtracting 3y on both sides. Then I'm going to simplify. 6y minus 3y is 3y. Bring down the minus 40. Bring down the equal sign. The 3y's cancel each other out, and I'm bringing down the positive 53. Now I have a two-step equation. I'm going to add 40 to both sides. I'm going to bring down the 3y. The 40's cancel out. 53 plus 40 is 93. Then I have 3y is equal to 93, so I'm simply going to divide both sides by 3, and I get y is equal to 31. I am then going to plug in that value of y into each angle measure. So I'm first asking for the measure of angle CKH. Angle CKH is right here, and that has the algebraic expression of 3y plus 53. So I'm going to plug in 31 where I see y. I first have to multiply 3 times 31, which is 93, and then 93 plus 53, which is 146. So the measure of that angle is 146 degrees. Now be careful in this second text box. I am now asking you for the angle measure of HKD. That is this angle right here. This angle right here. Here's the vertex of the angle. I'm not asking you for 6x minus 40. So I did not give you an algebraic expression for the measure of this angle. However, I know that angle CKH, which is the one I found over here, and angle HKD are supplementary, which means together they have to equal 180 degrees. Well, I can find the measure of this angle by simply subtracting 180 minus 146. I know this is 146 because that's what I did in this first text box here. I subtract and I get 34. So I know the measure of that angle is 34 degrees. Okay, guys, again, just be careful with identifying which angle I'm actually asking you to find the measure of. A little hint is if I'm asking you to find the measure of the angle with the algebraic expression, I would have written the algebraic expression here like I did in this first text box. All right, last but not least. Step 1, identify the type of angles that I gave you. Well, I have two angles that are on the exterior of the parallel lines and they're on opposite sides of that transversal, making them alternate exterior angles. We need to know that alternate exterior angles are congruent, meaning that they're equal to each other. So again, I'm going to set these two angles equal to each other like this. I have an equation with variables on both sides, so I'm going to subtract that x on both sides. Bring down the positive 10. 4x minus x is 3x. Bring down the minus 20. Then I'm going to add 20 to both sides. 10 plus 20 is 30, which equals 3x. Divide both sides by the 3x, and we get 30 divided by 3, which is 10, and 3x divided by 3, which is x. So we get x is equal to 10. Okay, now I'm going to come over here and substitute the value of x into the given angles to calculate their numerical value. So in this first text box, I'm asking you for what is the measure of angle EHB. EHB is right here. It has that algebraic expression, which I typed in for you. Okay, that one doesn't make a difference. I'm going to plug in that 10 where I see x. I had a 1 in here. You don't need it there. It doesn't make a difference. But 1 times 10 is 10. 10 plus 10 is 20. So the measure of that first angle is 20 degrees. Now be careful in the second text box. I'm asking you, what is the measure of angle BHK? BHK is the angle right here. I did not give you an algebraic expression there, which means you need to use another type of angle relationship to help you figure out what this angle is. Again, the angle that we just found the measure of, which was angle EHB, and this angle BHK are supplementary angles. They're on the straight line. They're right next to each other. So together they have to add up to be 180 degrees. Well, I know what the measure of this angle is. It equals 20 degrees. That's what we just figured out. So I can simply subtract 180 minus 20 to figure out the measure of angle BHK. 180 minus 20 is 160. So I know the measure of that missing angle has to be 160 degrees.